This webinar is hosted and run by Sociocracy for All. Sociocracy for All is a nonprofit. We're based in Amherst, Massachusetts in the US, but we're really operating globally at this point. We have 2 people on staff. That's myself and Jerry Koch-Gonzalez. And we have around 40 members that are active in circles that are working with us on different things around sociocracy. A lot of what we do is providing resources. What is important to us is that we make sociocracy accessible. So whatever is needed for content, like this webinar, whatever is needed for training, for consulting, community work, that's what we do. As I already said, our mission is to make sociocracy accessible to everyone, and we mean everybody. So we think a lot about scale. We think a lot about how can we make it as easy and as accessible to do as possible. One thing about licensing, I can give you this slideshow later, and anything SOFA produces has a Creative Commons license. That means you can use it. The only restriction is that we would love for you to say where you got it from, but you can use whatever you see here. All right, startup situation. Starting an organization is crazy. It's a ton of work, and this image actually that I picked, that's how I feel about it, you know, because we're sort of in a similar situation. Many of us have founded organizations, and it's a lot to think about at once. So what can we do around that overwhelm? What does sociocracy help to limit that overwhelm that we go into? And the 3 areas that I'm going to touch on today are how can we create structure to sort of focus our attention? The other one is how can we decentralize power? How can we make sure we spread the power and the tasks? And the other one is how can we separate the daily business, sort of what needs doing, the urgent things, from the long-term thinking, the important, the direction, setting of direction. We need some very basic vocabulary. When I talk about a circle, I assume that most of you know, but I'm going to say it to be sure. I'm in a team, and a circle in sociocracy is defined basically by 3 things. First of all, we know what the aim is. The aim is the description of what they're doing, or what they're supposed to do. Then the domain is what they're allowed to do. For instance, if you have a circle that manages the website, that circle has to be allowed to change things about the website. They need to have the password, they need to have the login and everything. If you have a gardening circle with a shed with it, it doesn't make any sense if that gardening circle does not have access to those tools. They need to be able to manage those tools. So the tool shed here would be in the domain of that gardening circle. And we have to know who our members are. That's very important. We always have to know who our members are. It's not going to come up all that much on this topic today, but in general, what is relevant about circle membership is that we have a defined way of knowing who's in and who's out. That doesn't mean that we're, you know, building walls. It just means that we know who our decision makers are, because only if we know who our decision makers are, the decision-making method of consent works. Because if I don't know whose consent I have to get, then I'm never going to make a decision. So we have to know who our decision makers are. But that's just a side note here. The way I think about it is we have the circle. So the circle right now is this here, the lighter gray. And the circle is connected, or the leader of the circle connects the circle with the wider context, so the rest of the organization. While the delegate does it the other way, it connects the circle with the wider context. Then the circle by itself is self-governed. That means they take care of their own business. They have their own files. They have their own meeting agendas, and they have their own facilitator so that they can run themselves. Let's look at a very basic structure. If you've been studying sociocracy for a while, especially through SOFA, you might be surprised because you see the word mission circle there. I will talk about that in a little bit. Right now, I want to focus about something else. And that is these department circles and their sub-circles. When I talk about a circle, typically what we have in mind are those work circles, like in the example of the gardening circle. And here we could think of one of these department circles or sub-circles as the gardening circle. That's where the work is being done, and that's also where the decisions are being made about that work. So a gardening circle makes decisions about anything that are the matters that affect them in their work, in the entire domain that is theirs. We'll talk about domains in a second. If we only put aims and domains into circles, we would have silos. So we would have circles that don't know about each other. One thing that we're not going into today is linking, but we also have the general circle in the middle. Hold on, I forgot something. So the department circles hold the operations and their policy, I already said that. They also take care of their sub-circles. So this circle, this department circle, would take care of the sub-circles that are linked with that department circle, and holds them accountable. So whatever they are doing, they are reporting to the next higher circle, if you think about it in high and low. So where I was going was the general circle is for flow of information so that we do not have silos in our work, so that everybody knows what's happening. So the general circle consists of 2 people from each of those department circles, and that's where they can talk about what's happening. So the general circle would hold all those circles, the lighter gray circles, accountable to their aims, so to the task that they're supposed to do. They created an opportunity for peer support for circles. And they are also a catch-all for operational decisions or even policy decisions. I will talk about that in a second. The good thing about the structure is, especially when we think about a chaotic, somewhat chaotic startup situation, is that we have a place for everything and everything in its place. We know exactly what is being done where. We know exactly what decision can be made where. And that's a huge relief, especially if you think about onboarding people. If you say starting a gardening circle, okay, some community garden situation, and you want to ask people to help manage it, it's going to be much easier to show them a circle structure like this and to say, see, and if now you join the irrigation system circle, that's what you do, and that's where you are. Instead of, the fear of volunteers is often that they get a lot of tasks and responsibilities being dumped on them. But in this case, you have it in smaller chunks, in small circles, and you know exactly where you're onboarding somebody. So that helps the people who are coming in, and it also helps you have the clarity where you want to put people. Second thing we want to do is decentralize. And I think about domains as cakes to eat. So if everything that is that an organization is doing is the overall domain, what happens is that we cut it into chunks. So let's look at that. So we have the overall domain, and now we have a subdomain that is being passed into a circle. So from the overall authority that we have, we take one chunk that we have to define, of course. Let's say everything that has to do with irrigation, any hose, water, whatever, okay? That is now being put into a circle, and they own that now. Overall, we want to distribute power as far to the outside, to the more specific circles, the sub-circles as possible. So that's the direction where things have to go, always away from the center, because we want to decentralize. So we would take other pieces, put it into those other department circles, and of course that goes on and on. So this circle can take pieces of their domain that they got and pass it on themselves. So what happens now is that when you look at the overall domain and all the pieces of cake that are being passed on, is that the overall domain sort of gets emptied out. That's how I look at it. And the circles can now just go and run with it. So the overall domain, like this circle in the middle, if you think of it as a circle, because really it's a domain, does not own the irrigation system anymore. It's now a different circle that's owning it. And the good thing is that we, in a sociocratic situation, we can tell people what they are supposed to do, but also you actually have the authority to do it. So you're always passing on both. All right, so that was number 2. Oh no, there's more. So let's look at a few examples around that. I already used the irrigation system example. This is a circle example that I really like here, and that's baking. So if you have a baking circle, okay, let's say some baking co-op, they form a sub-circle that only deals with pastry, and then another circle that only deals with bread. Now, all the decisions that affect only pastry are going to live in the pastry circle, and all the decisions that affect only bread are going to live in the bread circle. However, all the decisions that belong into both, that are overarching decisions, still remain in the baking circle. So if you think of it back into the cake, pieces of cake example, the domain is being passed on for pastry and for bread, but some of it still remains. Like for instance, if they use the same oven, the oven is still in the baking circle. It's really important. I've come to appreciate more and more the terminology of the domain, because it's really helpful to think about an organization in terms of domains, because then you understand what is being passed on. We're not only passing on tasks, we're only passing on authority, and authority sort of is packaged in domains. So when the domain gets emptied out, only what is not taken care of elsewhere remains in this circle. It could, in theory, go down to 0. It could be in theory that everything is being passed on. It's typically not how things work. There's always a little bit of overarching stuff. And that's also good. Otherwise, baking circle would hardly have any reason to meet. So it's good for every circle to have their own operational and policy business and to pass on big chunks. But we're going to talk about that too. All right. Now, separating the daily business from long-term planning. So this is what we already saw. We have the department circles, we have the general circle for flow of information, and there are quite a few organizations that only have this. I'm part of 2 sociocratic organizations that only have this. They have department circles, they have a general circle, and they're fairly happy. However, it's not really complete, and one can feel that. One can feel the difference quite a bit. So what we need here is the mission circle. What does the mission circle do? The mission circle holds the organization true to its mission and translates the mission into aims. So the mission is the overall thing. Like, why are we doing what we're doing? What is this organization here for? That's the mission. And now how do we translate that into actual doing? That is what's happening in the mission circle. Another way of looking at it is that the general circle and the department circles together create a self-steering entity. You know, they can do everything. So they're self-steering, but they don't have any direction, and the direction is set by the mission circle. So now something about why am I calling it mission circle? because that's new terminology. And for those of you who don't know, SOFA is in the process of publishing a book right now, and this is the terminology, and also, by the way, the diagrams from the book. The reason we're calling it mission circle and not top circle or board circle, those are the other terms that are typically used, is because it is a better description of what it's actually doing to say that it's the mission circle. For the very reason I just told you, it holds the organization true to its mission. And top circle always has this power over kind of flavor to it that people don't like. Board circle is fine. It gives people an idea of what it is or what it equates to in a way, but it is not a perfect fit. And this, yeah, for that reason, mission circle is a good name for it. I like it actually a lot, but we all have to get used to it. It was a decision that we all have to get used to it now. All right. So to make that very clear again, because I find it so easy to understand, to think about it that way. So the mission gets translated into the aim by the mission circle, keeping the organization true to its mission. The general circle translates the aims into sub-aims, so passes on those pieces of cake to the other circles and makes sure that's all spread out into circles. And is keeping the organization true to its aim, so make sure that overall everything is being done. So mission circle and general circle have very different roles. All right, for the fun of it, I'm going to show you the evolution of what it could look like if an organization started with just a general circle, what it would look like as if it were like a cell that is being budded out. And I'm going to show you the same thing again, all images next to each other. But first, for the fun of it, let's look at it, what it looks like when we see it like a cell. So we have the general circle. There are no roles forming. Now they're popping into department circles. They're adding a mission circle. They are adding sub-circles and sub-sub-circles. Now let's look at it one by one. So let's assume that we were starting an organization, and often people are fairly well in agreement about what they are planning to do together. And they would be the general circle then, because they are operations oriented. You know, they want to carry out the aims of the organization. And often what happens when you have a group of, let's say, 4 or 5 friends that are starting an organization together, maybe for-profit or not-for-profit, doesn't matter at all. Typically what happens is that we have some differentiation within the group. So let's say only one of them actually really takes care of the website, okay? And these dotted circles are roles. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So these are people who are taking care of something and do all the operations around that. And this is a process that happens fairly naturally. You know, especially websites are always a good example, because if you have a group of 4 or 5 people that are doing a local transition group, only one of them is going to take care of the website realistically, and also because it's such a defined skill set. Next, we have those roles into forming into circles. So now let's say a website is forming its own circle. There are now other people joining the team. So it's more than one person, and they now own their own policy. I'm going to talk about that more later. So now we're adding the mission circle. So now between the 3rd and the 4th step, what's happening is that the general circle is being separated out into a mission circle itself too. So now they have both. They have the flow of information, the steering, and they have the setting of direction. Which way this happens doesn't really matter, by the way. It can only happen that it forms a mission circle first and then department circles. It doesn't really matter, but both has to happen at some point as the organization matures. And then it just gets more and more complex. So from then on, it's a complete organization that just forms sub-circles wherever they need to, whatever helps them get their stuff done. And that, of course, can get very complex. This is a fractal way of forming circles. So this circle, for instance, decides themselves whether they want to form subcircles, and this sub-subcircle actually could decide to form sub-subcircles themselves. But that's a decision that is being made locally and not somewhere in the center. So I already talked about these purple ones. So those roles that are being differentiated out in this. But I want to show you, because that is, I want to show you that in very much detail next, in the next slide. So how do we get from people taking on some certain responsibilities, like the website was my example, how do we form circles out of that? And the cleanest way to do that, there are of course messy ways of doing it too, but the cleanest way to do that is the following way. Okay. So in this case, we have the mission circle here already, but it doesn't really matter. In this, if we have a mission circle, they would appoint the leader of the general circle. The leader of the general circle can also be called executive director or CEO. It doesn't really matter. Operational leader. That's, for instance, in SOFA, that's my job. I'm operational leader. So I'm leader of the general circle. The next step would be that the leader, that this general circle, so this one person, would find 3 other people. So this could be the people who had those roles earlier, like this could be the website administrator, okay, that now forms a circle, becomes leader of that circle, finds himself some people to work with, and now they have a circle that has a leader. And accordingly with the other circles. Now next what happens is that now we imagine, I'm just showing leaders and delegates here, the people, there's more people involved. But now there's a leader, a delegate being selected. So now we have 6 people overall in this general circle. So we have a link down and a link up. So to recap here, the cleanest version of forming department circles is to appoint leaders. The leaders find themselves a team. Once this team is established, they select a delegate, and then the general circle is formed with leaders and delegates. So for instance, if you have an organization like the local transition group, you might have a mission circle or not, but you have a general circle. You find out what your department circles are, assign who's doing what, form those circles. The circles are being completed with other members. You select delegates. Okay, now a different.
Jennifer,
yeah?
Can you take questions? Are you willing to take questions?
No, write them in the chat now and I will get to them later because I can't do it at once.
Got it, thank you.
Okay, so another detail I wanted to show is, again, so we already understand the difference between general circle and mission circle, but now what does that actually look like? And there are different versions, and I'm thinking here, sort of what I had in mind when I looked at this was the typical group of, for instance, a transition, local transition group, or any kind of interest group, or a group that is forming among peers. Because in the beginning, they will not think about having a board, like a mission circle. That is not on their radar. But over time, typically, that is a need that comes because we have a need for then finding out what a direction is, like the clarity around that. So in the beginning, you can say that the general circle really is the mission circle at the same time. So those 4 or 5 friends will make will take care of business, and they will look at long-term planning at the same time. And if you've ever started an organization, you know that that is actually a problem because there's always something that is important and urgent. So you don't actually get around to talking about long-term strategic thinking. So the business of the mission circle is typically what falls off the radar. So that's why we encourage groups to really pay attention to forming their mission circle, because that is where that focus is. And if we think about a place for everything and everything in its place, we also need a place where that long-term thinking is happening. And that is the mission circle. And yes, one can do it at the same time with the general circle, but experience shows that it's not happening that way. We just get too busy. So there are a few tricks. For instance, this one is a nice one. I used that once myself in an organization. So what is happening here is that the general circle are 4 or 5 friends, okay, 5 in this case. And they say, okay, we meet, let's say, you know, every other month we meet as mission circle. And whenever we meet as mission circle, we also invite our 6th person. So that 6th person might be somebody from the outside. And John Buck actually uses that example always. When you invite a guest for dinner, your kids will behave better. So this general circle is definitely going to talk about mission circle matters as soon as this person, this 6th person, shows up. So just inviting one person can really discipline your general circle to look at mission circle things. So even if you don't have the manpower or the human power, whatever power, people power, to form a mission circle, one person is enough to make that difference, because then you shift your attention somewhere else. So the next step would be to have 2 people from the outside. So this person in the previous one, it was this one person that was outside. Now we have 2 people. And in order to still sort of have a feel of we're all deciding this together, you can totally have 2 people from the general circle here, and then the operational leader is here. So now 3 people are on both circles. It's always hard to represent it, but these 3 people are the same people, okay? So the mission circle has, in this picture, 5 people, 3 of which are also in the general circle. So we have a very tight connection here, but it's its own circle because 2 people, you know, not everybody who's on the general circle is on the mission circle, and we have 2 people who make it special because their presence means that it's a mission circle meeting. This is in particular a structure that I use in groups that have a very flat hierarchy, where the general circle, so where people have a hard time getting used to the idea of a general circle in the first place, because it's sort of, instead of everybody deciding everything, now it's only leaders and delegates of the circles that are deciding or talking. They're not even deciding a lot, but they're talking. Some groups in a very flat hierarchy are nervous about that, and they have the same hesitation around the mission circle. So, because then it's just 2 people as the link, and who knows what they're talking about, right? So that sort of suspicion can take the edge off by just having more people that are delegates. There's no rule that limits the number of delegates. You can have 2 or even 3. So there's some nice hybrid forms that are very useful in some contexts. All right, and the last one is just the sort of standard way. For those of you who are not very familiar, I'm going to go over it really quickly, but I was sort of assuming familiarity here. So now we have 4 people who are outside experts. We have the leader of the general circle. We have the delegate from the general circle. And here I actually made them gray to show that they are now over there at the same time, that they're double represented. Could have done that too in picture number 3. All right. One thing that we still have to talk about is roles versus circles. I've sort of assumed that roles are self-explanatory, but they're not. So remember, I use those dotted circles for roles. So if you have a circle, any circle, they are overseeing all the operations, whatever the aim is, whatever they're doing. Might it be putting in new hoses if they're the irrigation circle? Or might it be, I don't know, uploading new images if they're a website circle? That's operations that they are managing. They are also managing policy. So these are generic decisions of how things are being done. For instance, who has the right to upload new images? That's policy. Or are there any special things that, like, what is the workflow around putting irrigation system in place after the winter? So that's policy. What is a role? A role is when only operational business is being put into a role. So what the circle does is, okay, whenever, let's imagine this is a circle that also holds the website. All the general decisions about the website are being made by the circle. So the circle would decide who has what rights, what login rights, what kind of roles there are, administrator, whatever, what kind of pictures are being used, and so on. But the uploading and the upkeep is being done by one person, and that is then the role. And that is, again, something that happens fairly naturally in groups, that they have sort of point person roles, like the website person, the, accounting is often done that way, or the person who responds to outside emails. It's actually an example that is going to come very soon. So if we have a buildings and ground circle, as many housing communities have, for instance, they are taking care of paths and buildings. In a community, they could have a lawn mower liaison. So that's the person that makes sure there's gas in the lawnmower, and that's the person who knows how to fix it. That's the person who makes sure it's always clean, and so on. That's the person who puts it away for the winter, that kind of stuff. So we have one person who's sort of in charge, but that person doesn't make all the decisions about the lawnmower. And Buildings and Grounds Circle writes down what they would like that person to do, and also what the authority is of that person. Another example is when we have a membership circle. Membership circle decides about all membership matters. What are the fees? Who can be a member? What's the workflow of becoming a member? What are the rights and responsibilities of what kind of member? There might be one person that always welcomes new members. That's sort of the buddy in the beginning. Okay, that is something that I've seen groups gravitate to very naturally. So this is not something that is very artificial to groups. What does help is to have some clarity around what that means to have a role. And the way I'm conceptualizing it is that a circle holds operations and policy in their domain, while a role only holds the operations. They just go and do things according to what the circle told them. So the circle says, what kind of images to upload onto a website. Somebody else goes and does it. Okay, hope that's fairly clear, but I'm here in the questions. The reason I'm bringing up roles is because they're kind of a funny in-between thing between a circle and a subcircle, and that's what we're going to see next. So roles are super handy to form some sort of structure when it doesn't justify forming in its own subcircle. We'll look at that now, and I'm almost done, by the way. So if you define a role, you have to know what the task is. You have to know what the holder of the role is allowed to do. And this is decided by the circle that is holding the role. There are a few telltale signs when a circle is meeting and should really bud out. And I call it budding out, when you either form a role or a circle. So when a circle sort of gets too crowded, and that doesn't only mean people, but too crowded for attention, for things to be done. Often groups, the only thing they feel is their own overwhelm, but they don't have the focus and governance to realize, oh, maybe we should form a subcircle. But that is super key, especially in a startup situation, because you have to have the awareness of, okay, maybe it's a governance issue. Oh, if we actually form a subcircle, we're going to have an easier time tracking things. So that's why I want you to know this. There are two slides. One is this, and one is the reverse. When do we notice that we actually don't need a circle? And when do we notice that we don't actually need a circle anymore, that we can fold it again? So imagine you have a circle, and half of the topics in a meeting are not really relevant to everybody. Okay, for instance, if you have a common house circle, so the community building in a community, it's an example from my life. There is a common house circle, and common house also holds kitchen, all the meals, all the community meals. And our common house circle tends to get overwhelmed because it's so much. It's the whole building and the whole meal system. And I'm very gently trying to get them used to the fact that maybe they should form a kitchen or a meals circle. Because half of the time when they talk about that, not everybody in the circle is actually even affected, because they might not be dealing with anything in the kitchen because they're doing other rooms, okay? So as soon as you notice that not all topics in a meeting are relevant to everybody, think, oh, maybe, maybe we could be doing it otherwise. Like maybe there's a different way of doing it that hits that sweet spot where everything we talk about is relevant to everybody in the room, because that's the ideal that you should be going for. Also, when you have too many people with too many different needs. For instance, if you have a group, again, from very current life, again, different organization, a group that is interested in sociocracy in schools, and some of the people really want to create materials, some of the people really want to act as peer support. If you notice that you can't really get them together, you actually have, your aims need to be more specific, and you need to put it into separate circles. So if you have too many people with too many different needs in one circle, it's time to think about a different structure that actually supports your needs there. And that's also, the third one is what I already said earlier in the beginning, when the circle feels overwhelmed with too much detail. Every room in the common house and the kitchen. When you feel that tension of, wow, it's too much, it's great if somebody in the circle remembers that there's something you can do about it. You don't have to suffer through that. You can tailor your own governance system and your own circle structure to your needs in every moment. So what does it look like to bud out? This is already familiar now. So we have a circle, wherever that is in the system, it doesn't really matter. So they're now getting overwhelmed, and they're noticing, oh, 3 of us are actually doing something else than the others. All right, first idea is to create a role. Maybe we shouldn't all talk about the kitchen anymore because it's really only one person dealing with the kitchen. Okay, let's put this in a role, and let's define that she only reports back every 3 months. Then we don't have kitchen on our agenda every single time. So a role is a way of packaging something and making sure that somebody's paying attention. You have some like tabs on it, but you're not dealing with it all the time. The next step is, from that role, you can create a subcircle. So now it's more people taking care of the kitchen, and you put policy decisions into that circle. So now, once we have a subcircle, we're actually taking that piece of the cake. Okay, for instance, the overall domain, the common house. Now we're taking the kitchen out of it and saying we're only dealing with everything but the common house and but the kitchen. Let me repeat that. So Common House Circle would say, now we're only dealing with everything but the kitchen. And you guys, Kitchen Circle, deals with kitchen. Now we've packaged it in a way that works for the group. The other direction, a circle needs to be folded in when the relevant topics don't get the attention they need. So, hold on, let me look at all of them before I talk about it. There are not enough people. So this is when a group is too ambitioned and has formed a circle when really they don't have neither the people nor the attention to actually really deal with them. So often that is what happens is that they feel stretched too thin, and often that is some wishful thinking going on. For instance, if you have a group that is just forming and they would really like to do some grant writing. So they are starting a grant writing circle, okay? But really nobody has attention for it. Only 2 people were willing to be in that circle. It just doesn't flow. Then it's not that you're doing something wrong, and it's not that people are not doing what they're supposed to do. The feedback that you're getting from that is, oh, maybe that circle is not ready to be on its own. Maybe everything that has to do with grant writing still needs to stay in the parent circle, for instance, the general circle. No, the people in the circle don't have a need to talk. So that is also something that I see. It's still separate from the others. When things are thrown into one circle and people don't actually have a need to talk. For instance, what I see groups do is putting all the admin stuff into one circle. So you have 2 like clean circles, and then there is website, finances, and whatever in one circle, even though they don't have anything to do with each other. That's very tempting, but it doesn't really help, because then they are forced to meet as a circle, but they're not really a circle. They don't have a shared domain. So then it's better to hold website and whatever I said as roles and not butt out into a circle. If there's no need to meet separately as a circle, it doesn't make sense to do so. All right, folding in is just the reverse. First step is, okay, the sub-circle thing didn't work, let's put it into a role. And this role thing doesn't really have enough traction. Let's just keep it in the circle. We'll all talk about it whenever it occurs. I want you to know both directions, because I want groups to know that they're in charge of their own governance structure. And if you're aware of that, you don't run to the behavior that I sometimes see where people suffer from their own structure, as if structure was something that is cast in stone, but it's not at all. Whatever works for your organization is perfect. So pay attention to those little telltale signs. Attention, how are people feeling, overwhelmed, stretched too thin, all of that. That's a good pointer to circle structure. All right. A few comments here. If you're interested in looking at the table of contents for the book, it's online. And I think in about 6 months or so, we'll be able to take pre-orders. There are lots of resources on this page. If you would like to study more, if this was one of your first events around sociocracy, this was probably way too fast and way too much for you, way too much detail. A good way to start is with this study group curriculum. The way this looks is that you have a group of friends and you listen to a video that is teaching you, that is me talking again, and you go through the basics of sociocracy in 6 sessions. If you're a little further ahead and you already sort of know what's happening in sociocracy and what it is all about, and you would like to try it out, I'm inviting you to look at this link, because we are now interviewing for our training that starts in April. Reminding people that you're welcome to use our things, and I'm going to throw the link to this presentation in the chat right now, so you can look at it or share it or whatever. And but we do ask for people to attribute to us. All right, and I'm going to stop sharing. Stop sharing. And look at all the different chat things that I wasn't paying attention to. That makes me a little nervous. It's really hard to be talking the whole time without seeing what is happening because I don't see you at all. Anyway, so give me a few seconds. Is there anything? Okay, it's hard for me to now sift through here very quickly. Mukunda, can I ask you to sift through the chat and see what is actually relevant questions? Would you be willing to do that? Maybe you can even, because there's, well, some of them are privately, that's the problem, right?
You're asking me, Jennifer, to sift through that?
Yes, and so if there's questions, you can put them in the chat now. Sorry, Mukunda, that came sort of sudden.
Okay, I can try. Maybe we can team up. A couple of people can do that, but I certainly can try.
Okay, so I'm going to start with one that came to me privately.
Yeah.
That's Victor. Okay, I'm going to read it. I did not hear much about policies. Do you still make a distinction between policy and operations? Did you outsource all policy decisions to the mission circle? How are policies made in sub and sub circles? Yes, all circles own their domain. That means they make all the policy decisions in that domain themselves. There's no change around that. It's actually quite the opposite of what I want to put it in the mission circle, because then you have a situation that sometimes co-ops have, where the or working boards and like constructs like that, where the highest circle makes all the policy decisions, all the rest is just carrying it out. That's not what we're doing. What we're doing is we're always passing on aims, like tasks and domains, the authority. And with the domain comes the right to make policy in that domain. So policy is where the work is. Let me skim what else I have. Then Mukunda's question around, came to me privately too, so you can read it. When you talked about a mission circle, you mentioned having outside experts. Am I right to assume that the word outside refers to outside of the general circle? Yes. Let me bring an example. What's a good example? SOFA is a good example. We have a mission circle that we still call top circle. And we have people in that organization that are not members of SOFA. Well, actually, they're sort of members, but the only thing they do is be on the top circle, mission circle. Yes, these are outside people. That's also a way, having outside people on your mission circle is also a way to get expertise into your organization. For instance, by having somebody from a related organization, having somebody who knows governance, legal stuff, finances, whatever helps you. It's your way of getting some expertise in. All right.
Jennifer, somebody's asking who is decided, who is in the mission circle? How is decided who is in the mission circle?
Yep. There's a little bit of a chicken egg problem here, because you need, somebody needs to start. So in general, circle membership in Sociocracy is decided by consent. So if you have 4 circles in a circle, the fifth member, those 4 people have to consent to that person entering the circle. Okay. What do you do, however, if there is nobody? And remember, I showed that metamorphosis from general circle, add 1 person that is the mission circle, and so on. Okay. In that case, it really depends who starts. That's the chicken egg thing. If you start with a general circle, you would appoint or select 1 person that is then making it a mission circle, and then that person and you 2 of your people from the general circle would then select other people until you have a good enough group that you feel okay about that mission circle selecting their own new members. And that's what you have in a standing organization. When you already have an organization, that's what you do. Every circle selects their own members. So for instance, in, again, SOFA example, Sociocracy for All, our top circle, some of the terms are ending soon. So we will select new nominate people who then we're asking into the top circle, mission circle. Okay, so circles decide about their own circle membership. You can't put somebody into a circle, that doesn't work. All right, Mukunda, help me.
Well, there's a question that I think you've answered, but it looks like we need clarification here. It says, what is the real reason to create a separate mission circle? Why can't general circle decide on mission, strategy, and direction?
Yeah, they can, but they typically won't.
Mm-hmm. And it's a lot.
That's not how that's, if it works, great. Don't change anything. But oftentimes it doesn't work. For instance, there's nobody here from my community, right? Good. I can speak openly. No, just kidding. But we don't have a mission circle in my community. We run sociocratically, have been for many years. We do not have a mission circle. And more people are concerned about there not being a circle that is thinking about overall direction. Yes, of course, the general circle could be doing it, but the general circle every month is busy with something else. We just don't get around to it. So we now have a different construct, and that is one of the sub-circles is what we call vision circle. But yeah, that sort of works, but it also sort of doesn't. It's okay, but it was too much hierarchy to introduce a mission circle for this kind of context. People didn't want it. So they can at the same time feel the need and not go along with the way it's typically being done, but that's just what it is. So, okay, I think.
Jennifer, just let me know when you want me to help you with a question. I'll throw one out. Ready?
Yes.
Okay. Roger from Berkeley says, if you start with a general circle, say 10 people, and then form three work circles by appointing operational leaders, and then these 3 circles choose their delegates, then these 6 people populate the general circle. What happens to the other people who were originally part of the general circle? Are they still members? And do they cease to be members once you have work circles with leaders and delegates?
All right, let me make sure everybody understands. So the idea is, I guess, that 10, what was it, 10 in the beginning? I want to get the numbers.
Yes.
10 people. 10 people are starting an organization together. They're now deciding to have department circles. So they are appointing leaders. Those leaders form circles. We get the delegates back from the department circles that are also joining the general circle. Somewhere along the way, the general circle has to decide to put their people into circles instead of staying in the general circle. That's going to be a tough decision. That's what I mentioned earlier, when groups really like the everybody decides everything sentiment, but it doesn't serve them. It's better to out of those 10 people, to take 4 of them, send them completely into a circle and let them do their own thing, because then they don't have to circle back with every decision. They can just go and run with it. And that's what we want. So in order to distribute power, we have to at some point let go of the everybody everything principle. How they do that? It could be once the delegates come back, that those people find a different place. I guess I would like more clarity around that. Once department circles are being formed, we have to know what our strategy is, what's going to happen. Ideally, the general circle is not a catch-all for all kinds of people. It is really only leaders and delegates, because the general circle should not hold on to a lot of power. It should be in the circles. So what other reason would there be except for flow of information? If no decisions are being made there, why would all 10 people want to stick around? So if there's a tendency to centralize it and those 10 people think that's where the action is, then that's typically because the circles have not received the full power yet. So whenever I hear of large general circle, my suspicion is that power isn't really distributed yet. Does that make sense, Roger? Yes, that was you, right? Yeah. You want to, yeah?
That was me. I have a related question. I'm part of a co-housing group, and so there's kind of a tendency, you know, for in some contexts for the entire group to want to convene to, you know, consider a site. Or for example, where does I didn't see in your diagrams where like there's kind of a general full membership meeting kind of thing would come in. Is that something you would advise against?
Co-housing, okay. Yeah, co-housing is one of those everybody, everything contexts, very often. You can define for yourself what authority, like what domain belongs where, okay? And for instance, site selection could be a decision made by everybody, could be. And I know that's what many groups do. For instance, also around budget, that's what many groups do. Keep it in the everybody decides. The ideal is that there is no decision that is being made by the whole group. That's the ideal. We can't always pull it off, but that's the ideal. So in your question, yes. So full circle in my causing community, full circle, we call that full circle, everybody, the all member meeting hardly makes any decisions. Makes exactly one in our example, but even that I find not ideal. That is budget. Budget could also totally be made by somebody else, but there was, you know, this is a little bit of a half-hearted implementation, because power wasn't. There's some holding on of. There was some holding on to power still, and that's often the case when you transition from consensus run to consent run organizations. What am I saying? So the nice thing, let me talk about the nice thing that happens when you don't have that many decisions in the whole group anymore. And that is that you get to meet and just do other things. Like for instance, you know, most co-housing communities have a monthly meeting. Our monthly meetings are not for making decisions anymore. Our monthly meetings are for getting to know each other more and for learning something, and for giving circles feedback on policy that they want to make. For instance, the site selection circle could be asking for feedback and then go make the decision. If you have a trust relationship and a good way of receiving that feedback and asking for that feedback, then that should work well, but you don't have to argue in a group of 40 people. It's better to hear each other in a group of 7 than in a group of 40. It's simply not realistic that we can hear more about each other in a group of 40. Actually, the opposite is true. So that's why the small groups is a good idea, because we get to hear each other more, and for that reason also hear more input, hear more feedback. It comes at the price of having to let go. That's hard. Stop here, Mukunda.
Jennifer, there's one more thing that Victor actually says, Victor from California says in answer to Roger's question, and he says that usually a circle of everyone is not a circle per se, but rather a periodic event. And so he's making that distinction that I think that it's a periodic event created by the general circle that everybody meets. So it's kind of a distinction that can possibly help some groups not have everybody involved in all the decisions.
Mm-hmm. It could even just be the holiday, whatever you call it, you know, once a month, once a year thing. I was answering in the co-housing context, but traditionally there's a monthly meeting that most communities are very wedded to, which is fine, you know, but that's how we're using that meeting. All right. I have a few, now if Mukunda is my questions manager, then you can send things privately to me because he won't see them. I'm gonna do one that's privately here. How to best identify which circles there are in an existing organization. Our IT outsourcing company has been operating managerless self-steering. Okay, yes, how do you best find your circle structure? All right. You best find your circle structure by knowing what your aim is. If you have your aim written down, So here's what I typically do when I do it sort of in a verbal way and a not very formal way. I do the following. So it's like, okay, so why does your organization exist? The answer that you get to that is typically the mission. Okay. Then the next question is, so in order to do that, what are you actually going to do in your organization? The answer that you typically get to that is the aim. So this is a description of what you're actually going to be doing. For instance, I don't know, in your example, then, you know, you can say it yourself if you feel comfortable. Then what the next step is, okay, for your overall aim, what needs to happen so that happens? And if you can tell me 3 or 4 things, that's great. That's the aims of your first department circles. So in order, I'm going to do a community example. In order to, no, I'm going to do a time trade example. We already had so many community examples. Running a time bank, supporting trades between people and building communities, the overall aim. What needs to happen for that? Well, we have to make sure people find each other. Okay, there we have the, whatever you call it, trading circle. We have to make sure we build community. Okay, that's the community circle. And we have to make sure the website is run well, like the whole platform. Okay, now we know what our department circles are. The easiest, and I've noticed that the easiest is that if somebody from outside the organization asks those questions, because you have to be able to explain it to me. And often when you have somebody from inside the organization, they think in people, they think in tasks, and then they don't see the big pictures easily. Okay, they're thinking like, oh, but if this is a separate circle, then so-and-so would have to be in that circle and in that one. It's hard to take the people away and just look at aims and domains, but that's what you need for clean structure. And then you work from there and look how they communicate. Yeah, but that's what I noticed. So does that help, Daniela? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Jennifer, there's
yeah.
there's one here that says that I like it because it talks about or it relates to hierarchy between the mission circle and the general circle. It says if the mission group makes the decision about the mission and 1 or 2 of the general group disagrees, does this mean that the decision is overturned or goes back to the mission circle for reconsideration?
So hold on, we have a disagreement within the mission circle?
No, well, you have the mission circle that decides on the mission, and then it's passed down to the general circle, but some of the members of the general circle disagree with either the wording or some aspect of the mission itself. So how is this handled? Because mission circle used to be called top circle, and usually there's a kind of a hierarchy dilemma here.
Yeah. Okay, there's several answers to that. So that question follows it has the same pattern of any other disagreement in a circle. It doesn't really matter whether it's mission or any kind of policy. You could also have a membership circle that is making policy that other people in other circles don't like. So how do you give feedback to each other? That's the question. Mm-hmm. So you give feedback, that's one thing. And the other thing to keep in mind is that general circle and mission circle are not entirely separate. 2 people are part of both. Leader and delegate are like the leader of the general circle. We didn't talk much about linking because I assumed familiarity with some things. But leader of the general circle is a mission circle. And there's a delegate from the general circle to the mission circle. So 2 people are part of both. And we do this whole linking thing because we don't want a them and us attitude between circles. With the linking, it becomes more like an extension of we. So this is, 2 of us and then the other people, they form that other circle. So in general, what happens is mission circle has deciding about the mission is in their domain, so they can make that decision. If you don't like it, you will let them know, and you can either go there directly, or you can use your leader and delegate that are going to be in your group. Of course, disagreement about the mission is going to be tricky because it sets the stage for everything else. When you have different missions or different aims, or you don't agree with the mission and the aim of your organization, you're the only one, then you're in the wrong organization. You have to be in basic agreement about that. And there's been groups splitting up over that, and maybe that's better in the long run, because that way they can each do what they really want to be doing. So sociocracy is not about, you know, keeping everybody together all the time. It's about finding the right structure for whatever people want to do. And if it's different things, then they are doing different things. Check.
Mm-hmm. I just have a question regarding time. How far are we going with this question period?
Well, we're sort of still in, I mean, we originally, you know, I went over time, half an hour plus half an hour plus half an hour. So we can go another 10 minutes here. Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Okay. I have one more question that I am that I can see here, and it's about facilitation. It says, in my organization, there's just one circle, but there's a strong opposition to having a facilitator. Most of us want to the meeting to flow naturally. So what suggestions do you have?
Hold on.
You see that one?
Not having, yeah, okay. This is about not wanting facilitators so that we can have natural flow.
Mm-hmm.
Getting the question right?
Mm-hmm.
Mukunda, what would you say?
What would I suggest? Well, there's somebody else giving another answer here a little bit below, but I would say have a facilitator. That'd be my answer. Having experienced sociocracy and other groups without facilitators, the sociocratic facilitation is quite, allows enough flexibility to where everybody have a voice, flows naturally if the person knows what he or she is doing, and meets everybody's needs. It's just a matter of learning the ropes.
What I would add is that making a decision to let things flow naturally always means also buying into all the crap that we're going to get with that too. Because flowing naturally means men are going to talk more than women. Flowing naturally means, you know, people in privilege are going to talk more. If that's what, like, you just have to be aware that not making a choice around format and process means you're going to resort to the old ways. If you know, like, look at kids arguing, I sometimes think to myself, yeah, letting things flow naturally. Where does that, I mean, that's not what I want to have. I'd rather have a facilitator. I know when my turn is. I know everybody gets to speak. I know what's happening. To me, there are no disadvantages to having a facilitator and only advantages. So I'm always a little helpless around that question, actually. I bought myself some time because I actually get a little, like, I find it hard to even, like, answer that because it seems, I guess I'm not sharing the sentiment that format is limiting. To me, format is freeing. To me, it is freeing myself from unhealthy patterns. It's freeing myself from having to track, when did we hear last from that person who never speaks, you know? Doing a round, for instance, means I know everybody can be heard, I can be heard, I can focus on listening. It just relaxes everybody. And having a facilitator is necessary to manage your meeting time. So I know some groups like this organic flow thing, but I think it's a myth that is not serving us. So I guess there is no way of convincing those groups. I know there's one of my favorite stories here that I'm going to tell real quick. It's a story that is a real eye-opener. It's a story that Jerry told me, my co-founder. He was part of a group that was very aware and conscious around all the isms, everything. Okay, so this was a group that had done their work, and they were in a training situation, so they were being trained, and they had to discuss something. And they made sure everybody's heard, you know, as one would, blah, blah, blah. Okay, then, and this was all set up, okay, somebody came to tell them, you only have 5 more minutes and you have to make a decision. And then one of the people who ran the workshop stayed in the room to observe what would happen. And what happened was, and these were all, you know, self-declared, open-minded people. In the last 5 minutes, only men spoke. Natural flow. All right, I think I said enough about that question. And what do we have here? Daniela asked another thing. Can I, hold on, can I look at that?
Daniela? Yes, it's about the founder syndrome.
Founder syndrome, yes. Oh, I'm laughing because I feel like I'm in the middle of founder syndrome and I get embarrassed about that. Yes, exactly. What a nice quote here. The same skills and work habits that were an asset during the startup stage become big bottlenecks to the organization's sustainable growth. Yes. In the beginning, you want people who decide a lot and who can get a lot of stuff done together, right? And then you want people who are listening, let other people do things. And that is hard, and that's what we refer to as founder syndrome. Being in that exact situation myself right now, the only thing I can say about that, and I would really appreciate more hearing from other people, but just awareness. And as soon, I mean, there is a limit in how many circles you can be. And if you wed it to circle structure, that means you're going to put it into circles. You're not going to join 20 circles. So at some point you realize you have to let go of a few things. And it is part of the game in sociocracy that you pass on aim and domain. So it's not yours anymore. Somebody else is doing it. So automatically you're letting go of power. Yeah, and that's it's really interesting to be on this side of it, because SOFA is now what, almost 2 years old. It's basically it has transitioned away from a what we call a mom and pop shop, 2 founders running things, and we're deliberately trying to put other people into positions because we are the bottleneck right now. So exactly what you're describing there is happening. So the only thing that works there is awareness, and since it's baked into sociocracy, how a circle is formed and so on, and that they do have authority, then it's sticking to the principles. And then you're gonna get there, even if it's hard. You're gonna get there some way or the other.
Jennifer?
Yes.
How would finding competent people play into that mix of helping founder syndrome?
Yes. Who was asking that?
Mukunda.
Mukunda is asking. What do you mean? Say more.
Well, because, you know, a founder obviously is very invested in his or her organization. And so he or she doesn't want to let go of the power or of the decision-making authorities unless things are going to get carried at least at the same level of professionalism or whatever. So finding competent people to carry out the different tasks is going to be crucial. And so sometimes you're going to have a bunch of people coming to the founders and wanting to be involved, but they don't really have the competencies to take on tasks. So it's a fine line. You don't want to push them away, blah, blah, blah. So maybe you want to speak to that, because I'm sure you're in the middle of that too.
Yes. I mean, that's where, again, the principle comes into play, a place for everything and everything in its place, because you can create roles or circles with a very specific focus. You know, you don't have to do everything quite yet, but okay, is there like this one thing, focus on that. and then build from there. You can, you know, be elected up in the circle structure and then have a more like a bigger horizon of the organization. But the small packages really help here, because you can develop leadership more easily if there are smaller chunks that you can give away to other people. Yeah, I think it doesn't take away from the emotional piece of it, but technically that's helpful, and practically too. But still, it's inner work that needs to be done on top of it. Did anybody ask a question that we didn't touch?
Josh Davis did. He says, any
I didn't even know Josh.
Wanting to be in all of the department groups, or is that discouraged or not?
Oh, I see. Oh, yeah, good one.
Mm-hmm.
Who? All the department groups? Well, it depends on how many there are. It's fine, but probably not sustainable. That sort of typically happens by itself, that people don't want to do the meeting load anymore, and they're realistically, not only is it the meetings, it's also the work, you know, and then you sort of shift into, you specialize and you end up being somewhere. There's no reason not to be in all department circles. My guess is just that is just temporary, and temporary might mean, you know, years, but still it's a transition period to more differentiation. But there's nothing to be said against it, really. Since decisions are made by consent, there is no problem in terms of power, centralization of power. Or if there's an attitude around that mixed with it, then that would have to be called on. But there's no problem, really, except load. Is a sociocratic? Oh, Marianne and Charlie have a question, and Marianne and Charlie, you can get ready, but I'm going to answer the one after that very quick. Oh, okay. Now you're writing it. You're confusing me. I'm going to do Irene first. Is a sociocratic structure possible with 2 or 3 people? Yes. One thing is, so you're asking about structure. You're not asking about decision-making, because sociocracy is more, I know you know that, I'm saying it for the records. Sociocracy is also the decision-making and the mindset of continuous evolution. You can have structure with 2 or 3 people, for instance, by creating roles and being very clear about that. In that case, you would be your general circle and mission circle at the same time. You could have a 4th person who only joins you once a month for your mission circle. That would be a sweet idea, to have an outside person. It really helps to have outside people in an organization. And you could create roles that you actually write up, consent to, so that you know what you're allowed to do as one of those 2 or 3 people. So just creating that clarity helps, even in a very small group, having the clarity of what your role is and what different hats you can be wearing and what you're allowed to do in that role. For instance, if you're the person who manages the website, how much money are you allowed to spend? Make sure, you know, like, to write something down that makes sense, that under whatever, 100 euros, dollars, wherever you are, you don't even have to ask. That way you save yourself some mental space and some back and forth and having to ask. So yeah, there are ways of making use of sociocracy in a small group. I guess my only concern and hesitation is that in a small group, people have to really want it, because it's very easy in a small group to gravitate towards just hanging out together, deciding everything together. And we tend to be less formal in small groups. So then you don't have the clarity. If it still works, okay, but clarity really, really helps. So if, you know, in 20 years when sociocracy is the norm, it will be easier to do it in small organizations, because then everybody knows how it works.
Mm-hmm.
So Marianne and Charlie, what was there? And I'm flagging time here. I want to close in 4 minutes, and I'm going to stay on. But I want to formally close because some people have time limits, and I want them to feel bad when they just leave. So let's see. Marianne and Charlie. Distributing, so a mixed context between paid people and volunteer time. You know, how much somebody's being paid is just policy. So sociocracy is compatible with any way of paying. Everybody's paid, no one is paid, half of the people are paid, the people in leadership positions are paid, only the people who do specific tasks are paid, whatever you decide. Just be clear about it. You know, the only thing that sociocracy requires is clarity around that. Somebody I know gave you the link to slicing pie model. I like that. It really, so sociocracy is fairly neutral. There are good models out there to figure out the pay, fairness around pay. Whatever works for the people works for sociocracy. There isn't much to say there. I'm gonna go one by one here since I have it. How frequently should the mission circle and general circle meet? Is there a ratio of frequency? No, it depends on how new they are, to how much. It really it depends completely. I can't see anything general that could be said here that would be true enough to say it. It really depends. When there's, especially when it's a young organization, meeting more often as mission circle is a good idea, but the general circle would have to meet more often too. So whatever people find right for themselves. If you meet once every 3 months and your meeting takes 4 hours, that's good feedback that maybe you should meet more often. If you meet every week and you notice you get through very quickly, then don't meet that often. You know, take your meeting time and how full your agenda is as feedback. You'll find it yourself then. How do you get a leader to do inner work when he has demonstrated and proven incompetence and ineffective leadership skills, yet he wants to stay a leader? There's a magic weapon that I discovered since I've encountered sociocracy. And then we see this magic weapon is feedback. Especially when it's feedback that is effective. And effective feedback is feedback that can be heard by people. That's a whole different topic that I can't go into here. Looking at communication things like NVC, nonviolent communication, and a way, we actually did 1 or 2 webinars on feedback here. And Jerry did one on how to deal with disruptive behavior. All those things apply in the same way. You have to be able to hear that person. You know, that person is probably doing it because everybody is always doing things for good reasons, for something that is important to them, like being very invested in the organization. That's not inherently a bad thing. You just have to be able to still describe your perspective without invalidating the other person's good intentions. That's what good feedback is. If that doesn't work, there is no way. You can, in theory, in a sociocratic organization, but I'm not sure that is even what's happening here. You can exclude somebody from a circle by consent. You can. You could kick that person out. There's a lot of emotional baggage with that, but you can, technically you can. I've been part of that once. Removing somebody from a circle, no fun, but it's possible. And it can be done with a lot of care. So it really has to do with your communication skills there. That's, I guess, all that there's to say about that.
Jennifer, would it also be appropriate to say that because of the sociocratic selection process, that the person is given a certain realm of certain parameters to operate within and a certain term, you know, you're going to be there for 6 months or a year, and there's going to be performance review based on those criterias, that somebody cannot just like fly off with power and go or else, or decide to stay leader when everybody else in the circle said no.
Yeah, especially, thank you for reminding me that, especially because every leadership position in sociocracy has a term end.
Mm-hmm.
So if this were a truly sociocratic organization, how it would play out is that 2 years down the line, the speaker, the speaker here, the person who asked the question, could not consent to that person being reelected. That's it. One objection and we're done. Then we would have to actually talk and work through that and be able to understand each other. But people don't stay in unhealthy leadership positions for a long time because we have a term end. But you know, it's funny because I don't really quite know how to say it, but I guess sociocracy works well. It's a little bit of a truism, but sociocracy works well in functional organizations. It is not a catch-all for all kinds of problems. So if you're very dysfunctional, sociocracy is just going to make it worse, because then you're going to fight over what's the right way to do it in sociocracy. There is a sweet spot of like functional organizations that still have some, like a lot of room to improve. They are good candidates for sociocracy. Groups that are about to fall apart and where there's like two camps and they don't even talk to each other anymore are not good candidates for introducing a new governance system. That's like doing major surgery on somebody who's already half dead. It's not going to end well. It's just, yeah, don't even have that hope. That's being realistic. All right. I would like to formally close because we have a sweet ritual around that, and I'm staying on. I'm going to unmute all in a second. It gets very loud very quickly with all the feedbacks. And what we traditionally do is we wave and say bye-bye, and then you can just log off if that's what you want to do, or you stay on and hang out. And typically, if you are wanting to decide whether or not to stay on, typically what we do is a round of what's been coming up for you. So if you have something you'd like to say or somebody you would like to connect with, please stay on. All right, unmute everybody, wave bye-bye, and then you can leave or stay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.